table 2 through 5, move to public comments. Oh, we have nothing in public. Athletics, Mr. Renzi.
Manzella. Request approval of the following supplemental positions for the 2023-2024 school year, contingent upon a signed contract no later than 1 month after issuance, including posting of the position if the contingency is not met. Varsity head girls basketball coach, middle school head football coach, middle school assistant football coach, and football scout. No questions or objections, I'd like to have that placed on the agenda, please.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the following volunteer coaches for the 2023-2024 school year: varsity boys soccer coach and varsity football. No questions or objections, I'd like to have that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval to advertise for winter sports supplies and equipment. No questions or objections, I'd like to have that placed on the agenda, please.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval to revise the minimum academic eligibility requirements for the PIAA varsity and sub-varsity athletics as proposed. No questions or objections, I'd like to have it placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Mr. Martucci.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Sangston.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Evans.
Nothing, thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Panzella.
Thank you, Mr. Renzi. Moving to buildings and grounds, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval of the following event and building usage request, not like items 1 through 13 spread, and no objections. Is that placed on the agenda?
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request the conditional approval contingent upon successful submission of screening and background checks of the following addition to the custodial substitute list for the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the gift agreement between the Greater Conzo Area Wrestling Club and the Terrence Schellenberger in relation to the Wrestling Center donation as proposed. That's under the naming rights for the wrestling facility. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Water pump to the CPC, request approval to authorize administration to solicit RFPs as needed to address the water pump or water line and installation for the Conzo Area Career and Technical Center pending meeting with engineering from the water company and solicitor review. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Mr. Kirsch, did the engineer get back to you yet, or not yet? Still working on it? Okay. Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And RFP fencing for CPC, request approval to authorize administration to solicit RFPs for fencing and installation at the Conzo Area Career and Technical Center to be paid through the PCCD grant. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And request approval to hire a 4-hour custodian effective August 24th, 2023. No questions or objections like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Mr. Kokenar, do you have anything to add? Mr. Martucci? Mr. Kirsch? That's all we have this evening, Mr. Manzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Moving to Carnegie Free Library, Mr. Martret. All right, thank you. Moving to Collinsville Area Career and Technical Center, Mr. Kokenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval for the Perkins Hilton Plan application for the Collinsville Career and Technical Center for the 2023-2024 school year in the amount of $81,915. Last year was $101,957. No questions or objections. I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
That's all I have, Mr. Panzella. Mr. Lake? Mrs. Sangston?
Nothing, thank you.
That's all we have, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kokenauer. Moving to curriculum, Mr. Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. 11A, Mount Aloysius College. Request approval for the cooperation agreement between Mount Aloysius College and the Collinsville Area School District for the college and the high school program for the 2023-2024 school year, subject to the Connellsville Area School District standard, terms, and conditions for the purchase of goods and services. No questions or objections, would like that placed on the agenda?
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Item 11B, literacy training. Request approval to train staff through the Fox Chapel Area School District Literacy Department as follows. 4 teachers to the Primary Teacher Academy, 4 teachers to the Intermediate Teacher Academy, 7 teachers to the Text-Dependent Analysis Training. Total cost will be approximately $22,000 to be paid for from the ARP ESSER funds. And no questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Item 11C, course handbook. Request approval to the amend the CAHS course handbook as proposed. No questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
11D, curriculum committee meeting was held August 15th at 1 p.m. That's all I have, Mr. Renzing. Dr. Coons.
I have nothing, thank you.
That's all we have, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harshman. Moving to cyber, Mr. Martray.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. We have nothing this evening. Mr. Cook, are you anything additional?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Ghost?
Nothing, thank you.
Okay, that's all we have.
Thank you, Mr. Martray. Moving to federal programs, Mr. Martucci.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval to hold an after-school reading program to support remediation for elementary students during the 2023-24 school year to be paid from ARP ESSER funds. With no questions or objections, I'd like that placed on Wednesday's agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And that's all I have, Mr. Mortray. Dr. Coons.
I have nothing, thank you.
That's all, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martucci. Moving to finance, Mr. Renzi.
Request approval for teachers and administrators to submit applications to the Community Foundation of Fayette County Idea Fund Grant in order to help achieve a level of creativity in the classroom that allows students of all learning styles to thrive in the amount of $2,500. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda, please.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the attached requisition orders and to authorize district business office to process orders and payments. No questions or objections, like that be placed on the agenda, please.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Mr. Lake,
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Harshman,
Nothing, thank you.
and Mrs. Robson. That's all I'd like, it short and sweet, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Panzella.
Thank you, Mr. Renzi. Moving to food service, Mrs. Sangston.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request approval of the National School Lunch Program, which is NSLP, meal prices for the 23-24 school year. The elementary schools, breakfast is free, lunch is free. Secondary schools, breakfast is free, lunch is free. The adults is $2.75, last year it was $2.10, and lunch is $4.75, last year it was $4.05. Any questions or objections, I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request a conditional approval contingent upon successful submission of screening and background checks of the following additions to the cafeteria substitute list for the 23-24 school year. No questions or objections, I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
That's all I have, Mr. President.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Martray. Mr. Trimmer. That's all we have, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sangston. Moving to personnel review and liaison, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request a conditional approval contingent upon successful submission and screening, background checks of the following additions to the professional substitute list for the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request a conditional approval contingent upon successful submission and screening of the background checks of the following additions to the support personnel substitute list for the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And the following family and medical leaves are confirmed by the board. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
and the following sabbatical leaves are confirmed by the board. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
I'd like to request approval, acknowledgement, and decline of the job offer for a special education teacher. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval to acknowledge the decline of a job offer from the following. And no questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval to accept the resignation of an aide effective August 21st, 2023. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And request approval to accept the resignation of an aide effective immediately. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And request approval of the following long-term substitutes for the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval to hire a personal student aide at the high school effective with the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
I also have, like to consider approval of the new collective bargaining agreement with CAEA for the period of July the 1st, 2023 through June the 30th, 2027, as presented, conditioned on a mutual agreement and approval by the CAEA by September the 1st, 2023. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Also, I'd like to consider rescinding the motion of the board action from the board meeting on July the 26th, 2023, creating an additional ELA position at CAHS and to request an MOU. No questions or objections, like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Mr. Renzi, do you have anything to
I
add?
have nothing to add.
Mr. Archman?
Nothing, thank you.
Mrs. Copeland?
Nothing else, thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Nothing, thank you.
That's all we have, Mr. Gonzalez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Moving to policy and legislative, Mr. Martre.
Thank you, Mr. Panzello. We have nothing this evening. Mr. Hartman, you have anything to add?
Nothing, thank you.
And Mr. Evans?
Nothing, thank you.
That's it. That's all we have.
Thank you, Mr. Martre. Moving to safety and security, Mr. Martucci.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. We have no agenda items at this time. Mr. Renzi, you have any? Mr. Kokenair? And Mr. Parlak? That's all we have, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martucci. Sticking with you for special education, please.
Thanks again. Request approval of the access reimbursement service agreement for administrative support and base staff for the 2023-24 school year, subject to the Collinsville School District's standard terms and conditions for the purchase of goods and services. No questions or objections. I'd like that placed on Wednesday's agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval from Nick D'Amico to attend the PA Fellowship Conference, Harrisburg, October 3rd through October 4th, 2023, at an approximate cost of $1,000 for registration, lodging, meals, and travel. All costs to be paid through comprehensive support grant through PATTAN. With no questions or objections, I'd like that placed on Wednesday's agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval for Nick D'Amico to attend.
Not calamari.
You good? Okay, request approval for Nick D'Amico to attend the CASE Conference, David Lawrence Convention Center, November 7th through November 10th, 2023, at an approximate cost of $900 for lodging, meals, and travel, with all costs to be paid through comprehensive support grant through PATT. With no questions or objections, I'd like that placed on Wednesday's agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the agreement between Belfair JCB and the Collinsville School District for the 2023-24 school year, subject to the Collinsville School District's standard terms and conditions for the purchase of goods and services, increasing $3,003 per year from the 2022-23 school year agreement. With no questions or objections, I'd like that placed on Wednesday's agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
That's all I have, Mr. Lake. Mrs. Sangston. Mr. D'Amico. That's all, Mr. Panzella. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Martucci. Moving to student services, Mrs. Sangston.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. Request for the agreement between the Stern Center for Developmental and Behavioral Health and the Collinsville Area School District for applied behavioral analysis support for the elementary autistic and life skills support classrooms for the 23-24 school year, with all costs paid through the PCCD grant and ARP EASER funds, subject to the Collins Area School District standard terms and conditions for the purchase of goods and services. Any questions or objections? I'd like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the supplemental resignation of Eric DeChanta, Activities Fund Director, effective immediately. Any questions or objections? I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the 23-24 CAHS musical production, not to exceed the budget of $50,000, contingent upon obtaining necessary performance licensing. Questions or objections? I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the following school district positions at a charge of $7.85 for each student physical examination for the 23-24 school year. Dr. Gina Canada, Dr. Rachel Fasten, Dr. William Kozak, and Dr. Mary Beth Beck. Any questions or objections? I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Request approval of the following dental examiners at a charge of 85 cents for each dental examination for the 23-24 school year. Dr. Joseph Joniak, Dr. Frank J. Yanensky, Dr. Jerry Perez, and Dr. Vermont. Any questions or objections? I would like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
Travel, request approval for the following travel, I'd like 1 through 5. Yeah, there were questions or objections, I would like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
I have 2 more add-ons. First one is request approval for a Collins Area High School student and teacher to attend an honors string orchestra tryout at Fox Chapel High School on September 18, 2023 at the cost of transportation and substitute teaching. No questions or objections, I would like that on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
And the second one is amending the school calendar for the 23-24 academic year to make general election day, which is November 7th, and the primary election day, which is April 23rd, to an active 8 day. Any questions or objections? I would like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
There was a committee meeting held on August 10th at 3. That's all I have. Mr. Harshman?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. D'Amico?
Nothing, thank you.
That's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sankson. Moving to technology, Mr. Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Panzella. I have nothing, Mr. Martucci.
No, sir.
Mr. Martre.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Ghost.
Nothing, thank you.
We have nothing, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harshman. Moving to transportation, Mr. Kokenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Panzo. 22A, no questions. Request approval of bus van drivers, this for the 2023-2024 school year. No questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
22B, request approval of the school van run stops for the 2023-2024 school year on file in the transportation office. These lists are available on the Collins Area School District website and have been published in the Daily Courier. Any questions or objections, I'd like that placed on the agenda.
Hearing none, that will be placed on the agenda.
That's all I have, Mr. Panzella. Mr. Lake? Mr. Renzi?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Nothing else, thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Panzella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kokenauer. Under the President's report, request approval of the resolution to authorize Rich Evans to sign any and all documents on behalf of the Collins Area School District, the Collins Area Career and Technical Center for the Pennsylvania Department of Education. No questions or objections. I'd like to have that added to the agenda. And next would be the slate of candidates for the PSBA officer elections. And I'd like to have them as presented. No questions or objections added to the agenda for Wednesday. That's all we have. Next, for nothing on agenda items for public comment. Okay. Anything for the assistant for the superintendent?
I have nothing.
Mr. Evans?
I do, but I will save them for Wednesday night. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion adjourned.